Welcome, everybody. My name is John Foster-Pedley. I'm the Dean of Henley Business School in Africa. And it's my absolute pleasure to host these dialogues, which are so well arranged by the team, on topics that I think were really important to us all, and to host really interesting speakers who are deeply imbued in this, who've got a lot at stake, who can give us all thoughts and answers. I'm not going to be pontificating myself. I'm going to try and get out of the way as much as possible and try and generate some conversation around an issue that is challenging us all now. So I'm going to be asking questions. I might be pushing people in different directions to answer questions that other people than me might ask about these topics. So, my great pleasure to introduce various people here. Melody Xaba, who is one of our ex-MBA students. Thank you so much. She's the founder of MyFutureWork. Isn't that right, Melody?
MyFutureWork.
Yeah, MyFutureWork. Okay, I'm thinking your future work. Okay, and you've got a lot to say on this. You're really deeply involved in this issue. We've got Waseem Carrim, who is presented as one of the youngest CEOs ever in South Africa. A really phenomenally interesting man, and I really hope that you're running the National Youth Development Agency. Waseem, hello. Have I got that right?
Hi, John. How are you? Yes, that's perfect. Thank you.
And of course, we have Monde Ndlovu, who is also, funnily enough, a Henley alumnus, who is the head of Advocacy and Thought Leadership for the Black Management Forum. Welcome, Monde, tonight. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, John. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you for having us this evening.
It's an absolute pleasure. So I think for the audience and a number of you there, we would really like to answer questions and not to have an easy ride. You know, obviously there's very contentious issues around here. Youth is a massive problem in terms of the employment opportunities, education opportunities, and what we do. But I'm going to give a bit of a moment to everybody as we start, just to talk for a few minutes, 2-3 minutes, however long you want, longer if you want, but I'll cut you off if it's too long. Just talking about your perspective on youth at the moment. And I haven't really given you time to prepare for this because I wanted to catch you a little off guard and get your real unprepared comments about what you really feel. And let's start in reverse order. Let's start with Monde. If you had to talk about youth there, what's their scenario? What's the conditions, and a few things you're going to say about that?
Thank you, John. Thank you, colleagues. Of course, as you've elaborately put it, that it's quite a contentious issue. Anything that's got to do with the development of human capital in the country or any emerging economy is a contentious issue, because you are trying to unlock the potential of the country. And so youth development is not an isolated issue in the country. It is part and parcel of the whole drive to unlock human capital in the country, in a country such as ours that has very unique historical background. I believe South Africa is an outlier country. It's an outlier country. It has unique traits, unique factors. We speak about the Rainbow Nation concept. We speak about those who are previously in charge of the country having remained in the country. That's an outlier issue. We're very unique in the world. The story of Nelson Mandela, as we've been celebrating Nelson Mandela from yesterday till today, and we're trying to make every day a Mandela Day. His story, his life story, is a story of an outlier. I believe that the traits of Nelson Mandela are embedded within the community, within South Africans, in terms of being an outlier nation in our thinking and in our approach to things. If you look at the structure of the economy of South Africa, it's very unique as well, very deep roots historically. So we're dealing with a multifaceted issue. And when we talk youth development, it should touch every aspect of the economy, every aspect of society. should be geared up in how do we move the country forward in terms of youth development, in terms of being an outlier and having unique traits. Of course, at the very same time of being an outlier country, we also have shocking challenges, acute challenges. So whether you're talking statistics around education levels, issues around literacy levels in basic education, etc., and how many of our youths are actually moving through the ranks. Issues such as should they learn in their indigenous languages? Of course, that is a critical issue. Do we know enough about those problems at that level that hinder the movement of young people into secondary education? There's challenges there. Again, secondary education. Between secondary education, moving up to the top to tertiary education, there's different challenges there. So stats are telling us that we have about 6% of the adult population that has degrees, 6% that have diplomas, 3.4% have TVET certificates. So as much as we've got very unique, beautiful traits about the country, but the challenges that we face are dire in terms of how do we unlock the ability to understand the economy and its different needs as well. So there's labor market issues. What are the key economic drivers? What's happening in that space? Career development within the youth. Are they choosing the right careers that are following a particular pattern? So the whole issue of survival mentality as well is within the fabric of our society. So we're trying to survive, yet at the same time, we're trying to unlock value, and how the survivalist mentality has played itself out in different facets of our lives, as well as another challenging issue, right up to the issues of tenders and procurement within business. You can tell the survivalist mentality that even when people start businesses, they're starting them for themselves and not necessarily to create employment. So there's another challenge there as well. So there's a mental challenge as well. How do we deal with the psychological effects of the harsh realities of South Africa? So more than half of the population, if you look at the upper bound poverty levels, are living in poverty. 18 million on social security, around 15 million are formally employed, 39 million economically active population, close to 60 million total population. So that is the reality that we are facing, and how do we begin to deal with that? Of course, we don't have all the answers, but trying to just try to tick some of the issues and begin to look at them and more closely. So what is really happening within those different levels that is holding us back in terms of job creation, entrepreneurship, etc., in terms of opening up the human capital space.
Okay, well, thanks, Monde. Thanks so much for kind of laying out the framework there. And there's lots of interesting statistics. I think it's worthwhile just putting it out. That's the broad outline. It's a context that's challenging for anyone in the world. How are we going to do something about it? We don't know yet. But let's go to Waseem. Thank you for that perspective. I'd be really interested to see, as you frame the conversation we're going to have, how you would see it, Waseem. What is your perspective on this issue from where you're sitting and the work you're doing?
Yeah, thanks, John, and good evening to everybody. So I first want to start off by sometimes how we frame the argument in South Africa. Yeah, and I think that the language we use sometimes is obstructive to development. So when we speak about young people and we speak about a ticking time bomb or crisis or disengaged, the negative framing of the argument often lends itself to us seeing young people as a problem rather than these assets and these capital and this ingenuity that can add to our economy, right? And framing youth development is critically important, because also when we singularly focus the challenge on youth unemployment, we lose focus on the fact that youth employment is simply an outcome of youth development, right? And youth development is the educational, the socialization, the linguistic, and the economic development of our young people in South Africa. And we must never forget that where we find the spaces of young people, we must try and develop young people in all the spaces in which we found them. And that ultimately will translate into a youth development outcome for the country and positive youth development outcomes. If we look at where we are, South Africa has invested heavily in basic education and to a large extent higher education, right? And for all of those investments, we've not necessarily seen the employment outcomes that we would have wanted to see, particularly basic education. Now, we could spend 10 dialogues diagnosing the problems in basic education, but at the core of it, the singular challenge that we seem to face is that while South Africa has deepened access to basic education, we all see the first day beautiful selfie pictures of mothers and fathers with their children, we struggle to get young people to complete basic education. Of the million or so young people who start basic education, start grade 1, only 500,000 end up writing their matric certificate. And those who are in the unemployed, a majority are those who do not have a matric certificate. Yeah. So that when we talk to young people, the majority reason is not academic challenges, but majority is access to household income. Yeah. So that's largely one challenge. If we look at a positive development in South Africa, higher education has provided almost a singular template for social mobility for young South Africans, right? Of NSFAS graduates, and consider this, TEFSA, which was the predecessor to NSFAS, had a budget of about 6 million rand in 1992. Today, NSFAS has a budget of about 40 billion rand, supporting at any given time between 500,000 to 600,000 students, right? And while NSFAS may face its problems, we feel that it has provided the greatest tool for young people and social mobility in South Africa. The challenge you face is that of every NSFAS graduate which enters university, only 46% of them end up graduating. So 1 out of 2 ends up graduating. And many times you make the investment in a young person, they go right up to 3rd year, and then they can't complete for a variety of reasons. Now, we treat the young person who dropped out at 3rd year the same as a young person who only has a matric certificate. Surely there's a difference between those two young people in terms of educational outcomes. Yeah. So we know the problem, right? We know very high levels of youth unemployment, and the majority reason is because on the supply side, not necessarily producing the skills we need. On the demand side, an economy that has fundamentally not grown for the last 10 years, unable to respond to the global financial crisis, unable to respond to the shock of a COVID-19 pandemic, unable to respond to the shocks that we saw last week, right? President has put economic reform at the center of the agenda. We see it. We see the president trying to effect economic reforms. We see him consulting NADLAC. We see energy supply try to be changed, dealing with state-owned enterprises, dealing with the high levels of debt in government. Why are we not seeing translation of those results, right? Is it erosion of the state? Is it inability of the state to deliver? Is it the pandemic? Difficult to point exactly, but we see the efforts of trying to make economic reform. Yeah? Singularly, the president also sees youth unemployment outside of the economic reform. In SONA 2020, we put together the Presidential Youth Employment Intervention, which was a packaged proposal for young people to deal specifically. I'm not going to go into the semantics of it. I'd like colleagues to read about it, and I'll post in the chat some of the detail around the Presidential Youth Employment Intervention. So there is mechanisms, be it in entrepreneurship, be it through a national pathway management network, skills development, to deal with the youth unemployment crisis. I will argue today, though, that does not go far enough in dealing with the crisis we face, right? 8 million unemployed young people cannot necessarily wait for economic reforms. They cannot wait for the rebuilding of trust. Yeah? There's 2 things that I think we need to do. We need to, 1, define the culture and value that South Africa wants to be and wants to have in a democratic society. I don't think we've ever had a translation of what we would like to be in a society, especially post-democracy. Secondly, I'll argue that from a policy perspective, South Africa must implement, if not universally, at least partially, a minimum employment guarantee for South Africa's young people. This will mean that the state must act as the backstop of employment for all young people, or the majority of young people in South Africa. Where will we find the money for this to be done, right? One, we must reduce the systematic effects of corruption which erodes from the national budget. But two, we have to have the difficult conversation, and it is a difficult conversation, about raising the money in the fiscus through a social solidarity tax that provides for our young people, and at least in the interim provides an employment guarantee for South Africa's youth. What this will do is increase not only young people's income, but household income. It will create economic multipliers at the lowest common denominator, boosting local economies, boosting small businesses, and improving South Africa's developmental outcomes and growth trajectories. With that, John, I'll leave it there for now and look forward to the engagement.
Thank you, Waseem. That is tremendous, actually. I mean, it was so articulate. There's so much in that we'd love to unpack. But I want to set the scene with Melody in a second, but both you and Monde have raised very different perspectives on one issue. You're talking about the enablement, the education failures, the need to get some, much better sort of support, the multiplier effect at local level, all critically important, I think. The question that's raising in my mind, and perhaps many others, is why isn't that happening if we know that that's what we need? And we can come back to that in a little while. So thank you. Melody, MyFutureWork. Okay, this is your enterprise, and you are trying to find employment for young people and opportunities. So what's your perspective on this, please?
Yes, my perspective on this is we don't have a youth crisis, right? It's not just a youth crisis. We have an entrepreneurship and innovation crisis in South Africa. And the youth right now is the one that's just paying the price because they are at the end of it and at the bottom, of it. If you look at entrepreneurship in South Africa, like 15% of this, only 15% of our startups survive, right? That's a problem because if 75% are failing and only 15% survive, where are the jobs, supposed to come from? If you were to even look at it, from this perspective where you go, 15% of the startups survive and you're sitting with the 70% unemployment youth rate, do you see where those jobs went? If you were to just even look at that. And then when it comes to the youth, only 6% of our youth in South Africa are entrepreneurs, right? And this is, the problem here is that the interventions, I think, that have been created to try and solve, the crisis for creating jobs and unemployment and solving unemployment, they intervention, they are too late. To try and groom and develop, someone for a job when they are 18, 19 years old, in my opinion, it is way too late. And the challenge really sits with the environment in which then we are raising our youth. And one being the education system at school, right? Are they getting the right skills that they need to get in terms of just even being skilled? Kids go to school, they learn their maths, they learn their science, which they should, they learn their English, which they should. They finish school at age 18, but they have no skills. They don't know how to do anything. They have no skills to do anything. And only then do we look at, now you can go to university to go and study to get the skills that you need to get. That is late. That's actually very late to try and teach someone skills because they learn, they're trying to find themselves. By the time they know how to do anything, they're already in their 20s and 30s, and that, their ability to do stuff and to create things is competing with starting families, getting married, switching careers. So I just believe that our interventions need to come at a much earlier stage. Our youth in South Africa doesn't lack creativity. The main thing that they lack, is skills. And so therefore, they don't have the confidence to innovate products because they don't have skills. There are problems all around them, right? And what is innovation and what is entrepreneurship? You innovate solutions to solve problems. They don't have skills, so they can't solve problems. So they can't really create, more jobs. And that's the crisis that we are sitting with, as South Africa. And it's not just for the youth, but it's, the huge crisis when it comes to creating employment, in the country. If you look at, our youth, at any given day, right? You can, and this is in different places, whether you're talking about the township, whether you're talking about squatter camps, you take a drive, then you're going to find that this youth that we are talking about are clothing branded, expensive branded clothing, international brands. In December, you can never go anywhere near a Nike shop because the queues are so long. And the thing about it is that if they are consuming this product so much, how come we don't empower them to make the product? Even with our interventions for skills development, we don't look at things like, can we empower the youth to produce the things that they consume? So for example, how much are we empowering the youth with skills to make clothes? How much are we empowering the youth to make furniture, to make dishes, to make cosmetics, to make hair products, to make cell phones, the things that they are using, the things that they are consuming, and how much are we empowering them, to do that? I also just feel like a lot of our interventions, when it comes to learnerships, they focus on, you're empowering the youth to get these skills so they can then get the right CV to go and get this job in corporate. Corporate cannot, employ everyone, and actually shouldn't. That's not where we need to be focusing our attention on skills development. We need to focus our attention on how do we empower the youth to solve the problems that are in front of them, because that's how you start to develop, the economy. We need to give them the skills to be able to feed themselves. And that's the challenge that, we're sitting with, is that even if you finish matric, I know of kids who went to private schools, like very expensive private schools, that are struggling because their marks were not good enough, to get them university entrance at the, university of their choice. And now they are sitting and trying to figure out what's next for me. That child doesn't necessarily come from a poor family, but that child doesn't have skills either. So you can look at it from a perspective of, you've got the youth that is marginalized, that comes from poor communities, but this seems to be a problem as well for the youth that you would say, comes from families that have resources. So the problem really lies in the way that we treat innovation and the way that we treat entrepreneurship. And until we really start to put a lot of effort in that, we are not going to have jobs for the youth. It's not going to happen. And that's my perspective.
Fantastic, Melody. That's so passionate and there's so much coming out of this. It's so thrilling. I'm trying to pattern in my mind. There are so many things to do. What are at the root of it? And clearly there are 2 or 3 things at the root. One is a sense of capability and confidence in youth and the opportunity they're not being given. There's such great comments coming out. Thank you, Daniel and Ndlovu and Jeanette and Shanolo, and for all your great comments there. Please look at them, panelists. So why aren't we providing, what's happened to our schooling system and our education system? Is this a clone of the worst of colonial education systems, as it were, that we've never reinvented? Or should we be reinventing it so it's enabling for the youth, thinking differently about what we teach and how, and building up teachers, building up our chain? And then are we teaching practical things? What's happened to the TVETs? And why are people not succeeding in university? Surely we should be inventing in education. So there's many things that I think we need to radically change. But to have youth unable to exploit their energy and capability and finding a way to channel them, this is deeply wrong, isn't it? This is deeply dangerous. Because how can we build an economy when we've got the highest Gini coefficient in the world, when we confuse education with intelligence? Just because you're educated, people think you're intelligent, and maybe because you're not educated, you fear you're not. And I can tell you at Henley, we take 85% African people, 52% women. They're tested offshore with the Malaysians, the Germans, the Finnish, the Danes, and the British in blind assessment on our MBA, and they do as well, if not better than all those. So we've got all the intelligence we need. So where are we going to start this? Let's have a couple of ideas. Okay, so I'm going to push here. Each of you have come out with ideas. and we've got lots of questions. So I'm going to start picking on a couple of questions here, and you can argue with each other. Great talking about education. What if the country determines, develops, this is Xaba, and reaches a social compact with society, government, and the private sector on key country capabilities, not just for the current economy, but for the change one we want to evolve into, because we're still digging things out the ground, saying that should be developed within the next 3 to 5 years. Put a plan together to develop youth competencies that will deliver those capabilities and make SA shine again. Okay, I'm going to throw that one at you, Waseem. What do you think? Can you answer that? What do you think?
Thanks, John. Thanks. And I mean, we love the word social compact in South Africa, right? So we all got to go to NADLAC once a month, and we go there, we sit, and business sits, and labor sits, and government sits, and we agree. And then we leave there, and labor goes out and says, issue a statement, the government won't pay our workers increases, and we'll never agree with what they do, you know. And business says, government is too slow on reform, and we're not doing what needs to be done, you know. So we seem to talk the talk on social compacts, but we never seem to do what needs to be done, right? And I think a negotiated process is one where all parties walk away feeling equally unhappy with what they've come out of, right? So we've got to have these difficult conversations, right? Because the social compact, if we're going to speak about it, you've got to speak about real things, right? What are we talking about? Is labor prepared to sacrifice workers' increases for the next couple of years, or are we going to keep reneging on that agreement to create space in the fiscus for more developmental kind of programs, right? We've always spoken about businesses' willingness to invest in the economy. So the large amounts of capital that business sits on, that is not reinvested back into the economy. I think we saw in COVID, the loan guarantee scheme, for example, where the financial services industry doesn't seem to have much incentive to put money into the small and micro enterprise sector. So what does social compact look like in South Africa, right? Who's making the steps forward that enable us to be able to move forward? So for example, I saw someone post a question about the youth employment service. That was a good start, right? We took a current policy, broad-based Black economic empowerment. We said to companies, here, take your money, you want to move up on the BBBE scorecard, take that and put it into a current crisis that South Africa faces, right? Take that money and use it to subsidize the wages of young people. It's, in theory, it is an excellent policy. It's created 60,000 new employment opportunities that didn't exist before. What are the other mechanisms that we can use to move the conversation forward? Because
just to interrupt, Waseem, you've asked a lot of questions here, and I'm getting desperate for the answers. Okay, because we have this wonderful way in South Africa and elsewhere of looking at a problem and all critiquing on it and getting us wonderful insight into the problem. We walk away without the answer. How are you going to answer that?
I'm saying, what's the sacrifice that everybody's willing to make? For me, on the labor side, it's foregoing increases in the way of protecting a job. From the business perspective, it's committing resources, investment outside of government into the entrepreneurship space, particularly for young people. And from a government perspective, it's about leading ethically, about creating the system for business to be able to thrive, about putting those who are corrupt in jail, right? So for me, it's the sacrifices that each one is willing to make in tangible formats, not in this wide rhetoric about social compact.
But let's look at that moment, at that thing of corruption for a moment, and let's not label corruption as being belonging to any type of people, anything. Corruption is global and worldwide. I know, I work for big multinationals and I've saw it everywhere in the world, in Europe, everywhere. But the point about corruption is you've got this much money, haven't you? And then the moment you start giving offers, the 100 million or 10 billion, 15% have gone off to somebody just to pay money to give you the contract. That money goes out of the economy, frittered off to Dubai or somewhere, and then there's no multiplier effect. And then the person, your youth that you're building up, that Melody and Monde are building up, who've worked hard to get the qualifications, the degree they've struggled, and their family have, to get the capabilities to do a contract, they can do it well. They don't get the opportunity. It goes to somebody's friend or somebody's family who does the job half as well for half the money. And so that loses another 30 billion or whatever it is. So of your 100 billion, 50's gone. And so, and those kids who've grown, who have the opportunity, don't get the opportunity to do anything. So what you're saying is that corruption kills youth. Am I right? It kills youth opportunity.
100%.
And it doesn't kill, and it kills the young emerging entrepreneurs out of the townships, everywhere else, the ones who get. So that's what we have to be clear, that that's what's happening there. We can't allow that. That's your point of view, is it?
100%.
Okay. Monde, what do you pick up on this, please? What do you think?
Thanks, John. I think firstly on the issue of corruption, it's quite, it's quite a dire issue, and corruption is a human challenge. It's a human challenge, and human beings who don't have the right set of values, the right set of principles, when they are caught up in decision-making offices where they're holding the levers of power, if they don't have the right values, then we're going to have a serious challenge. So for me, once we now start talking about ethical leadership, and I also believe that the concept leadership broadly should be ethical. So for the mere fact that we are prefixing leadership with ethical or bold leadership or compassionate leadership, etc., it really now shows us how bad the leadership question in the country and globally actually is. So there is a values question mark on the kind of leadership that we have, a values question mark on how do we begin to unpack the capabilities of the country and what kind of capabilities the country is going to need moving forward, especially with the advent of 4IR. And Professor Chilizi Marwala hammers this issue quite a lot, that we need to get onto this bandwagon, and unless we don't do that, it will move past us very quickly. So for me, on the issue of capabilities and looking at what exactly we need to focus on, I'm very biased when I look at the economic system to banking and financial services sector. Stats SA previously has released the report that finance is the biggest industry. Now, I'm raising this issue to say that banking and financial services is the backbone of every economic system and is the backbone of this economic system. Why? Because it touches on every other industry and sector in the economy. So if we don't get it right in the banking and financial services sector, and look at the capabilities that the country needs, then you look at the current demands in the labor market, which is science, engineering, and technology, right? Dovetailing that with what is happening within the banking and financial services sector and the kind of skills that we actually need there to drive the development forward, we need to focus on that. Then we also look at where are the skills going in terms of the business types in the country, right? So we know that the private sector is the economy, right? It produces over 70% of our gross domestic product, and also gross domestic expenditure. So the private sector is the engine of the economy. Now, when you have a closer look at that, you also now need to discuss managerial skills within that space.
Managerial skills. That is sorry, I'm really excited by that because people don't talk about that enough. Yeah.
So looking at managerial skills, which the BMF has been pushing ever since its inception in 1976 to say that we need to develop managerial skills. So when you also look at the political side of the system, we are lacking in managerial skills. So I'm going to say this now, that we can begin to think about managerial skills in how the unemployed youth who have got critical skills in terms of finance and management can assist government in repairing the capacity damage within the political system, local government, provincial government, national government, etc., and how that army of youth, unemployed youth, can be utilized because they are there. Whether they be unemployed or those who are about to graduate can begin to move into that kind of program to begin to assist the government in repairing that side of managerial skills. In the private sector, focusing on what is really happening with the different layers of management in terms of representation and the kind of representation we have there. And when you zoom into those numbers as well, we're beginning to see that the top 4 levels of management are lacking that diverse thinking, are lacking the fresh ideas that can come from bringing in diverse people into those spaces. So when you look at those statistics, unfortunately, you're still having the private sector in the top 2 managerial skills, having a lot of white men involved. So how then do you begin to diversify the presence of managerial leadership at that level that can actually bring about a different viewpoint to how businesses run, bring in new ways of understanding, new perspectives, if you are keeping out a lot of the population outside of those decision-making layers, especially in the management level. So management is critical, managerial skills are critical, and that's where Henley comes in as well, in terms of how does a Henley Business School, beyond this dialogue, begin to assist the organizations that are represented here and business in providing managerial skills to potentially youth who've got those finance skills and become engineering qualifications, and we can fast track their development. And I think that is a possibility where Henley can partner with the private sector and other business schools, by the way. It's not just Henley, but we're biased to Henley, right? So how Henley can come on board and how BF come on board, NYDA can come on board, and all other organizations can come on board, and how can we assist in further developing managerial skills for the economy?
Well, I can hardly resist jumping in there, but I'm facilitating this conversation, Monde, and you can't just wave that in front of me to excitedly answer. I'm not going to answer that, but I'm saying we're going to do something together. But that's a beautiful answer. So good that people brought up the issue of white representation, people who look like me at senior board levels. You know, I want to ask you a question, and you can answer it now or later. What should people who look like me saying to other people who look like me?
Can I jump in?
Yeah, you can.
You know, the thing about people who look like you is that you've got skills. You've got skills, you've got knowledge, you know, to pass on. And if people really are invested in helping, you know, to solve the problems, is that they have to roll up their sleeves and be willing to sponsor. And by sponsor, I don't mean just, you know, in finances, right? I'm talking about it in the sense of, you know, you have the mentor and then you have the sponsor, right? Where, you know, you have the mentor and the mentor can guide you, but the sponsor is the person who holds your hand and says, here's an opportunity, here's access, you know, to this market for you. You know, if you are here, here's another step where I can take you, know, to go to that other step further. We have a lot of mentorship in the country, but we don't have enough sponsorship. And this is whether we are talking about in the workplace and whether we are talking about outside of the workplace, right? In the workplace, a lot of people go in the workplace and, you know, they perform well, they do well, but they lack sponsors in the workplace. And so climbing up the ladder becomes a challenge because there's certain opportunities that they don't know about, that you find that are only for a select few. You know, people tend to want to sponsor people who look like them. It's not very often that you come into the workplace as the black kid and, you know, have someone who is, you know, your white male, your white female want to hold, you know, your hand. Me myself, am a product of sponsorship, right? When I first, you know, started working, you know, 12 years ago, one of the things that helped, you know, to fast track, you know, my career when I was working in TVZ, I had a sponsor. I had that person who was holding my hand who said, you know what, you may not know things, but I see that you've got potential. So, and she was more than a mentor. It was the sponsor. And we need a lot of that. Even with entrepreneurs, people want to give entrepreneurs all kinds of training, right? Which is great, right? Training is great, but, you know, entrepreneurs don't need training. They need, you know, access, you know, to markets. They need to be able to do work. And the that takes more than just, for me, that would be a message that I would want to put out, to people who've got the skills, to white people as well, to say mentoring, to sponsor. You need to hold someone's hand, you need to open the door for them and show them.
Okay, so I get that. I get that,
Melody. To start closing.
So that's a great thing. So say to people look like me, mentor people, okay. But that's not enough, is it? Because there's got to be more. There's a transformation that Monde is talking about. But business, to make money in business requires, it's not easy. It's not easy to create a viable business, especially not now under these circumstances with, COVID and the unrest, as well as the economic challenges, the lack of education that people are coming up through. We have to do more than that. We have to do more. This country cannot thrive unless the majority of the people get skills and get skills quickly, all right? So we have to do a lot of transformation. There's so many questions here, I don't know where to start, but I think I can see a Henley sponsorship program emerging, Melody, and you are obviously going to run that, and I will support you 100%. Let's take on some other ideas. Let's be proactive here. The education system, it's hopeless. What about the TVETs? In other places, in the UK where I come, 50% of people are getting tertiary qualification. Here it's maybe 6 or 8. How are we going to change that? What about the TVETs? What about doing what we're doing in Switzerland and China and Russia and Germany and Vietnam, where you've got so different forms? Waseem, what do you think of that?
Yeah, so I think that TVET colleges present a massive opportunity. I'll talk about the challenges and then maybe some of the solutions that we can put forward for TVET colleges. So if you look at the NSFAS applications year on year, the majority of young people, 80% of NSFAS applications go towards universities, right? The majority of young people see the exit pathway of poverty as go to school, get a good matric pass rate, go to university, get a job, right? And the statistics reflect it. Graduate unemployment at 6% is the lowest form of unemployment. Yeah? So there's a clear pathway through university. So TVET colleges are not attractive to young people, right? Because they see the rates of TVET learners and they see that the graduation rate is less, but also the environment of TVET. If you can go and compare a TVET environment to university environment, university is much more. It's much more beautiful. There's much more access. It's almost becoming a class issue between universities and TVETs. Yeah, and then the last one is that the TVETs get a lower share of the budget, right? So naturally, there's less to be split amongst much more TVET colleges than these universities, which means the outcomes of TVETs are less than universities, right? And even if you look in the workplace, for example, I've been to Cecil, for example, and I see the way the welders and the technicians are treated compared to the accountants and the lawyers. So even in corporate, we treat the TVETs and the vocational learners less so than we do the more.
I'm going to challenge you there, Waseem. Yeah. I'm going to take you on because you're going to beat me up and win in this argument. But I know because you know more than I do, but I'm still going to challenge you. When you look at our TVETs, the governance is horrific in many of them, and they're under-resourced, and they're not necessarily generating skills. 45% of the current workforce, according to OECD, have skills for the current economy, let alone the transformed economy, if you're going to start looking like Vietnam. Surely we can reinvent the model of TVET, have a business ownership, sector ownership, different industry ownerships, change the whole governance model. Are we not holding on to a governance model in a centrist manner out of fear for them being taken over by the past? Whereas we should move radically, collectively together into a future and build skills. What do you think?
Yeah, 100%. And I think you've hit the nail on the head in saying that what we're dealing with in South Africa is not seasonal unemployment or crisis unemployment, it's structural unemployment, right? And structural unemployment needs radical solutions to be able. And I also don't think it's difficult to go and raise money to fix TVETs, right? Germany, for example, wants to pump money into South Africa's TVETs, they've got money, but it comes down to a governance issue, if you don't get the right type of people leading these institutions, and maybe it raises another point for your conversation today. How many people in this room, private good business leaders, are willing to come into the public sector, willing to make their time to spend in fixing the public sector, because that's another important point. He's attracting the right
but
kind
is the
of
door
skills into the
open to
public
them? But Waseem, is the door open them to do that?
I think it is.
But is it too
I just think it
politicized
is.
and closed off, and people are holding out of fear for a lack of control? Whereas we need to create a dynamic economy. We all have to survive in this. What do you think?
Yeah, look, it's a very fair point that you raise. I think that the current president is definitely trying to change the narrative around it. I think he's trying to lead ethically and competently and putting the right skills in place to be able to fix the country. Obviously, you've had massive erosion over the past 10 years, and these things are not going to be fixed immediately. But I do think that the private sector skills are critically required in the public sector. Telkom, for example, is loaning data scientists to government, tangible programs, 200 data scientists to government to fix some of its challenges. And I think we need more of those public-private collaborations if we're going to make a dent in the challenges that we face.
So let's make a change. So what's going on here? So such good questions here. Here's one, a really nice controversial thought from Stephen Lynn. You can lead a horse to water, you can't make them drink. The motivation and drive in general is lacking. Is this what's wrong? It's such a sense of hopelessness and a lack of purpose. Either the sense that they're not going to get opportunity, or that the opportunity will become hijacked by internal issues. Do we not need to build a sense of purpose, not just among youth, but among ourselves, for this economy we're trying to build? Melody, what do you think?
Yes, I absolutely, agree with that. And I'll go back.
And how?
To
How then?
Point.
How are we going to do that?
How? Okay. Yes. So, and I'll go back to the point that I made in my opening remarks, right? About when do we bring in the skills education in the chain, right, of our education system, because creating a sense of, or helping someone to find their sense of purpose requires more than just, you're going to school and you're learning the subjects that you're learning, but it requires you having skills and being able to solve problems, right? People who have a strong sense of purpose contribute to society. So to give people a sense of purpose, we need to help them to become contributing members, right, of society. And people need to have certain skills in order for them to see the problems and say, I see this problem and I've got this particular skill, right? So this is what I can contribute in order for me to solve this problem. And I'll give you like a very basic example. If we look at the looting incidents of, the past week, which were devastating, and it was a lot of young people. That's another part, that was, more devastating about it, is that it was a lot of young people. And I was having a lot of conversation with my friends and my family members. And one of the things that, we've been talking about and realizing is that the youth that is able to support themselves in some way. And I'm not talking about the youth that went to university and they've got degrees and they've got super jobs. I'm talking about the girl who bakes cakes and sells cakes to her neighbors in her community. Did not feel the necessity to go and loot because she can feed herself. And I think we need to go to those basic and be as basic as that and say, how do we help the youth to feed themselves? That needs to be the starting point. Besides the big skills and you can be that, you can be this, how do we help you to reach when you turn 18, 19 years old, to be in a position where you can feed yourself when you're 18, 19 years old? Because by the time you're 25, 26 years old, then you're able to be innovative, to be doing bigger things that make a bigger contribution to the economy.
So here we've got here we've got a situation. We've got 8% of people or whatever get first degrees. That's 92% don't. They go into the workforce if they can get a job. They struggle because they haven't got qualifications. We've got another thing in South Africa. We've got a mass of people who are working in jobs, supervisory jobs in their 30s, 40s, who never had the education options. They now do have the education options. Sure, at Henley, we've got a pathway. I'm not talking about Henley now. So you can come in your 30s, do a level 5, level 6, level 7. I see Welcome Vitboy there. Welcome's got a tremendous story of how he's turned his life around and he's studying programs with us now, and you'll soon have a degree. Then you'll soon go on to postgrad diploma while he's running NGOs and doing everything else. But why don't we change the way we think about education now? Start doing much more education while people working, much more online education, be less enthralled to the education establishment, even the government establishment, and provide new ways of getting skills to people. Shouldn't we now start to move radically in different directions with our education? Monde, I'm going to ask you that, and then we're going to pick on a couple of questions. Please, if you're asking questions, stick up your hands, you know, in that raise your hand thing, and we'll try and answer your question. We've got a few more minutes. Monde, what do you think? Isn't it time we can this current antiquated education system and done something more radical? Or do you think we can resuscitate this half-breathing body we call South African education?
I think, firstly, we have discussed the existence of the infrastructure that does exist in the country. Secondly, I think one way to move in a more radical direction is to deeply understand some of the issues I had spoken about in my opening remarks, because I think that we are not fully grasping the nature of some of the problems in the different educational levels. So that's why I mentioned the issue of language, right? Is language a key factor in understanding maths and science, right? So obviously we're going to say definitely it does. Then it's another story. How do you then begin to equip teachers who can teach maths and science in different indigenous languages, right? So that is critical, what's happening at that stage. The other layers that are also happening, and the impact of poverty, by the way, in some of those layers of education, better access to education. And why is there a dropout rate in secondary education, right? Which is then leading to fewer of youths moving into the upper echelons of tertiary education. So I think that there still needs to be more understanding of the problem and the different layers of those problems by people who are doing much more research within the educational system and actually wanting to fully grasp the nature of those different challenges. The next point is that we're now in a time where government is holding back on spending, which is a challenge. And the whole debate of austerity or how do you drive fiscal expansion, right, and monetary expansion from an economic point of view. And I think that's a critical question. How does government begin to unlock more value in moving education in a more radical direction in terms of access and resourcing students, which is another challenge as well. So one of the issues that has come out more recently, even through our student chapters, is the issue of, yes, we are at school as students, and we're BMF members, but you're now asking us to participate on webinars and have meetings on webinars, but we lack the resources to do so. And now with lockdown, we are moving education online, but now, which government is trying to move everything online, but what is the issue around resources? So within our organization, and I'm not just talking BMF, how are we assisting our students to gain resources that can enable them to have their meetings as volunteers of the organization on the ground, and how do you assist them to move online? And there is that raging debate of connectivity, especially by students, in moving in a radical direction. So yes, you can state and say, let's move education online. But now, if you don't understand the other issues within those challenges, you may be leaving out a certain portion of students who don't have the kind of resources that the middle class has, and their children, right? So we did mention earlier that more than half of the population, if you look at the upper bound poverty levels, are living in poverty. And sometimes when we make these statements and we look at these stats, we don't fully grasp the true impact of what is happening in the country. So the middle class, unfortunately, live in a totally different South Africa than the working class in this country. And so that is why when we begin to try and radicalize education, which aspects do you want to radicalize?
Let's take that on then. Sorry to interrupt, but But, you know, you see, this argument about digital divide is a huge one, and we could have another whole session on that. You know, do you stop people learning for those few who can't when you've got 90%, over 90% smartphone penetration in South Africa, which is a medium, but the connectivity may not be. So what the government priorities become? Is it building the same old universities? Or is it providing mass smartphone education, simpler things? There are many ways we can do this now that we can quickly elaborate. I'm conscious also of the time. So I'm going to, we're obviously going to have another session on this. We're obviously going to pick it up, and certainly we're at Henley going to drive it because we are deeply passionate about the need. We cannot survive. We cannot build an education. We cannot build a country without educating or giving opportunity and skills to people. So I'm going to ask everyone, Mamadise, we'll just have another session. I think Mamadise is advising me on that. We'll just close off. There are so many questions. We're going to try and grapple with this. It's open the Pandora's box. But the one thing that's really important to me, you can't look for the government anymore to solve this. You can't wait for the great, it's in our hands. How do we take it in our hands, work together? So we do educate everybody, change the dynamics and build up hard, but we're darn well going to try and do it. I'm going to ask a few closing questions from everybody, and I'm looking to see if Mamadise is going to ask me to pick in any questions.
John, because Tenelo works on these programs, can we just give him the mic? Tenelo, if you can just keep it short and sweet, and then we can invite the panel to close off. Tenelo.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for having me. I'll pose the question here, and I'm not sure if everyone read through what we do as an organization, but our main focus, one of our products, is an e-learning program that actually provides social media readiness, because with a lot of organizations and recruiters, as I've said in the chat box, they have begun doing social media screening in terms of recruitment and in terms of getting out opportunities to the youth. So as we have seen in the news and everything that has been happening in our country lately, everything is digitally based and a lot of people engage online. But now another skill that has become vital is what people say on socials, because it could affect their social media image negatively, massively, and it could ruin a person's career just like that. So yeah, so that's exactly what we focus on right now.
Thank you very much. And I know that looking at the people in this session, there are people who are doing marvelous things. I think we should start curating this and create a new movement to educate. We've got to reinvent this. But let's close off then with the last words from everybody. Melanie, I'm going to leave you the last word and let Waseem do the first closing off, because you haven't had a chance to speak for a little while. Waseem, you've offered such great pearls of wisdom. Thank you. What else have you got to offer?
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. So I'll let you in on a little bit of a secret here, right? So I mean, government's got to respond to the unfolding crisis that we saw last week, right? So I think you're going to see a bit of an expansion on physical policy, particularly to respond to the crisis. So let's say we had money available, right? Let's say there was a pot of money we could use, right? I've heard lots of solutions today, but I haven't heard one solution at scale. You know, it's not about empowering 10 young people or 50 young people or 100 young people. You need things which impact in the hundreds of thousands of young people. Yeah? And that is the solutions we need to be moving towards if we're going to extricate ourselves from being in crisis all the time. Yeah? The second thing I'd like to say is that whatever you do, the outcome has to be the reduction of poverty and inequality, right? And therefore, I think the best way for us to do that is stopping to look at this at an individual level and start to look at it at a household level. Because when we bring it down to a household level, we make the problem a little bit smaller than it is now. And it gives us a much more sustainable model in solving the problem in the short to medium and in the long term. So I'll close off with that, Jonathan. And I've left my contact details if anyone would like to get in touch with me as well.
Please, you're not going to get off that easy. We're going to talk to you more soon. And this strikes me that this is a youth and younger person initiative anyway. This is time to seize the reins here. Thank you. Monde, You next. Thank you so much for your astute insights and also your perspective from the BMF. Really well thought through and welcome. What are your closing thoughts?
Thank you very much, John and colleagues and fellow panelists. I think my parting shots, I must repeat what I said about Nelson Mandela being an outlier. This program is based on Mandela Day, and we should take heart that if we have this opportunity to meet virtually like this, it means we have the ability to create a chain reaction, a thoughtful reaction amongst each other in terms of these issues. And youth unemployment is a consequence of the system, and it's part of the greater challenge of developing human capital that will unleash the economy of this country so that we can be globally competitive and indeed that we can rub shoulders with the best in the world. So having said that, Nelson Mandela gave us that task that South Africa is an outlier country on the continent. There's no other country on the continent like us. There's no one who has this unique story like we do. The story of Rainbow Nation that is dying, and some people are saying is dead. I don't think it's dead. I think it's the issue of embracing diversity, embracing the difference, embracing the fact that we are not the same, and giving each other sufficient opportunity to allow each other to thrive. And one way of doing that is having these conversations about the disenfranchised, historically Black people, Africans. How do you bring them into, and how do you further utilize those in the system to further change the structure of the economy moving forward? And of course, we won't be able to change everything, but if we can change one thing, John, we would have succeeded as this group of people who are on this platform. Won't change everything, but one thing, if we're able to do that, John, we would have succeeded in our mammoth task of putting a pebble into the pond that will have ripple effects moving into the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Monde. That's a rousing call. And I tell you what, we're going to change more than one thing, because this is not something that's going to go away. This is a commitment. We've got to make change, multiple changes, and we are going to. So, Melody.
Yes, so my closing remarks, my appeal really to everyone is that we need to just stop looking at the government to solve our problems. And government is important. Government plays a major role, right? Don't misunderstand me. But just from where we are right now and where we've, what we've seen in the past, 25 years, we are in a place now where active citizenship is required more than anything. Empowering one child actually matters. If there's 100,000 of us empowering one child, that's 100,000 kids that have been empowered. So it's just, we have to move away. We need to move away from government is going to give us money for this and that and that. There are problems that can be solved that don't necessarily even require money. You don't require big funds for you to take on a child and say, hey, I am gonna guide this child. Right, so don't even wait until you've got lots of money and just, for a moment, just forget about the government until you've actually done something, until you have empowered at least one child. Yeah.
So thank you very much for everybody for those questions we couldn't get to. I'm so sorry we couldn't, but we will record them. And we are going to do this more. We're going to do more of this, because this isn't just a thing for today. This is part of a movement we're going to start working as a business school, because we have to if we're going to build businesses, you need the skills, and the skills come from somewhere. We need to rearrange. You come at it from a logic. This isn't about satisfying government or corporate. This is about having people being productive and using their natural contribution. We're going to find ways to do it. It's not just resources we need, it's resourcefulness. If Vietnam can transform their own economy, we can start doing this. We need a vision and a purpose. I know my kids can't succeed unless everybody's kids succeed. And so there is no way we can build an economy. The political configurations will work, but if the political configurations aren't helping people being prosperous, then they're not working for us. We have to fight corruption, you said, and why? It's not because it's an abstract thing, it's because it's stealing opportunity from those who've given their lives to build their skills. So now we're starting something. Thank you all for doing it. Thank you very much, Monde. for your wise words from BMF. Thank you very much, Waseem, for your words from yourself, your heart, and for the National Youth Development Agency. And Melody, keep on doing that work, and so many good people in your audience doing that too. I feel we have a purpose, and that purpose is that we're going to build a country that is going to give skills to people, and we're going to work on this. It's not going to be easy, but we're going to do it. We have to carry on doing it. It'll take some time, but we'll make some differences. And this is a movement we're all going to commit to. As a business school, we certainly are. Our business school is not for corporates, it's for skills, it's to build businesses for a nation. That's what we're going to do. So have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Good night, everyone.